I'll go ahead. So more people are going to be joining, but we have a very full call today. And so I just want to get started right on time. As many of you have seen from some of our correspondences recently, unfortunately, Dan Press passed away a couple of weeks ago. He was an incredible um, person, helped found CTIP and so many of our initiatives, really all of our initiatives, as I'll talk about later. I want to play a quick video clip of two of his videos, his most recent CTIP can call and a call that he did back in, or a video that he recorded back in 2018 or 2019 talking about the importance of CTIP and his work and his passion. And then I'll share a few reflections. Recognize that this is a heavy moment for a lot of us. And Dan touched so many people's lives. And so as we watch this, just take care of yourselves. Be on video, be off video. We're together in community. And this will be about 15 minutes. And then looking forward to the rest of the call. So I will go ahead and share the video and then share a few thoughts as well. All right, so everybody should be able to see that. And
Hi, my name's Daniel Press.
Sound
I'm
good?
a partner in the law firm of Van Ness Feldman, a Washington, D.C. law firm, about 80 lawyers. I've been a partner there for 30 years. My practice has been representing Native American tribes around the country, both in Washington, advocating with Congress, helping them build their tribal governments, and when necessary, litigating. Well, it grew out of my Native American practice. After 40 some odd years doing it, when I first got out of law school, I went to work on the Navajo reservation as a legal services attorney. Spent 4 years there, then moved to Washington, and I've stayed close to a lot of friends on the Navajo reservation. I go back a lot. And after 40, 45 years, two things happened. One, I noticed things weren't getting better on the reservation. There was still high rates of alcoholism, high rates of suicide. People I know were committing suicide, and all the wasted potential. And I had thought 40, 50 years ago that in 20 years, much less 40 years, all of these problems would start diminishing because more and more Navajos were going to college, there were better housing, things like that, but they weren't getting better, and the data verified that. Native Americans still have the highest suicide rate in the country, the highest substance abuse rate, the highest high school dropout rate, highest diabetes rate. So that was part of it. And part of it was the kinds of projects I was working on just weren't succeeding. The opportunities just seemed so ripe, and yet something kept getting in the way of it, and it frustrated me. There's something wrong here, but I couldn't figure it out. And fortunately, right about that time, I was given an opportunity to teach courses at Columbia University, undergraduate courses in Native American issues. And I had a group of 15 very, very smart young people, about 2/3 of them were Native American. And we explored the issue of what explains so much of the dysfunction, and we went through all the potential explanations. Well, it's because their constitutions were written by non-Indians, because the land situation is so screwed up. And eventually, there was consensus that the only thing that explained it was historical trauma. And fortunately, Columbia has some really excellent psychologists who are doing research on trauma. So I asked one of them to teach one of my classes, and a woman named Frances Champagne. And she talked about the research she was doing with mice and showing the historical trauma being passed from generation to generation. So I got interested. The thing that really sent me over the top or made me drink the Kool-Aid, my wife just knew I was interested in historical trauma, and she found an article and she emailed to me about something called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. I had not known about that even though we were talking about historical trauma. And I looked at that and I said, that wasn't done in San Diego, that was done on the Navajo reservation. I mean, the kinds of outcomes, high rates of suicide, high rates of substance abuse, high rate. And for the first time, the question that I'd been wrestling with all those years of what explains all of the problems on reservations and why they aren't getting better is adverse childhood experiences and historical trauma.
Jesse, can I interrupt for we
Absolutely, Dan. This is your
before? Yeah,
presentation. More
yeah.
than
I realized I didn't tell everybody how CTIPP got created, so you're already so
my bad.
yeah. So one of the people on the roundtable, a researcher at NIH, was asked to speak at this program that Dr. Andy Blanche had put on of federal employees on trauma. And so I went to the lecture, and at the end of the lecture, I walked up to the front of the room to talk to my friend from NIH, and she introduced me to these two people, Andy Blanche and Sandra Bloom. And we told them about how we had created this roundtable on Native American trauma-informed programs. And Sandy said, you know, we've been talking about creating a national trauma-informed organization. I said, well, why haven't you? You need one. And she said, well, we don't have a room in which to meet. So I said, I've got a law firm that has lots of conference rooms. Come have a meeting in my conference room. And a couple of months later, we had 25 people, led by Sandy Bloom, and they created CTIPP. And then we, as I love to tell people, I found a stray along the streets by the name of Jesse Kohler, who really helped take the organization to the next level. So that's how CTIPP got started. If you walk the halls of Congress almost any day of the year when Congress is in session, you'll find it full of people from the local level, little groups, all with their badges on or they're handing out material advocating for their particular cause. Everybody's got a great cause. And those who are most effective in getting money and legislation from Congress are the ones that have been able to put together a united effort from the local level so that the congressmen and senators know that this is an issue that's important to their constituents. My vision is one of these days, and I know it's Jesse's, is that we'll have a Hill Day and we're going to have hundreds of trauma-informed coalitions from all over the country walking the halls of Congress, meeting with the senators and congresspeople, educating them about trauma science, educating them on why it's so important for federal dollars to be allocated for local coalitions. And for that to happen, we created the Press On, which is a national coalition of local trauma-informed coalitions. We need every one of you that's a part of a coalition to sign up, make your coalition part of this national coalition. Those of you who aren't in a coalition, we urge you to get together with other people in your community and create a coalition. Because while it's great to have individuals lobbying, the most effective way is for an institution in that community to be the one speaking with a voice to your senators and congressmen. So that's where I want to see CTIPP go for the future, to build this national coalition that is a powerful voice that is heard all through the halls of Congress, and that we finally get what we know is needed, like funding for local coalitions, federal programs being required to incorporate trauma-informed science into their health or education or labor programs. There's so much that needs to be done, and it can only be done through this grassroots effort to educate and advocate with your elected officials. So we're going to be launching this thing in the national coalition in a couple of weeks, I guess. And we also created a coalition of statewide coordinators to have a similar coalition of statewide coordinators. And thank you, Carrie. Remind me to create, if you create a coalition, create a community on basis. So I think my voice is running out. Jesse, I'll turn it over to you. But thank you all for listening. Thank you all for your really caring comments. Uh, I really appreciate it. I'm gonna work to get better.
Dan never stopped working to get better. Um, and so a lot of this is going to reiterate some of what Dan just shared. But in the 2 weeks since we lost Dan, I have reflected on some things that I just wanted to share um, in this time. Dan was an amazing human, and I was lucky enough to be able to call him a colleague, friend, and mentor. I'll get to some of his contributions to the movement, but more importantly, I want to highlight who he was as a person, because I believe that it was the essence of Dan that allowed for the transformative work he did to take place. Dan loved very deeply and was committed to an endless pursuit of justice and knowledge. The most important thing in the world to him was his family. Though he worked hard throughout his career, he rarely let work get in the way of his responsibilities and commitment as a father and husband, and a more recent station that brought him great joy in life as a grandfather. Professionally, Dan was a passionate attorney representing Native American tribes with stories of lobbying Congress and setting up structures to support well-being in indigenous communities. Examples of this include helping to found the Tribal Employment Rights Office, known as TERO, and developing an intertribal bank that is still a significant lending institution to this day. Dan was passionate about Native American issues and learned so much over the course of his career. He loved being on tribal lands and being a part of those communities. However, as his career continued, he was troubled by the fact that things around him seemed to not be getting better as much or as quickly as he had expected. He thought that his work would improve life outcomes throughout the communities he worked with, but there continued to be high rates of substance use, suicide, and other issues. The lost potential he saw disturbed him deeply. About 10 years ago, while he was teaching a course at Columbia, as a professor, Dan worked with his students to try and understand what was causing dysfunction across Native American communities. After analyzing a multitude of potential factors, the class landed on historical trauma as being the only thing that really explained it all. Dan's wife, having heard him talk about historical trauma, sent him an article about the ACE study she had come across one day, and he read the study and recognized those outcomes. And that's really when he became committed to promoting the trauma-informed care broadly. Most people start to wind their careers down when they are approaching their 70th birthday, if not earlier. Dan was not most people. Leveraging the expertise throughout his life and career, he became a co-founder and in many ways the engine behind CTIPP. Now that he had a solution that could help so many individuals, families, and communities he loved, he worked to build systems and structures that could transform society and life for better. Serving as CTIPP's general counsel, he helped support the development of the organization as well as advocate to members of Congress and their staff to promote trauma-informed policies. He worked closely with other experts on CTIPP's board of directors to develop resources that supported his advocacy efforts as well as supporting ways for more people to get involved. When he found out he was sick last summer, he seemed to only work harder to create the change in the world around him that he knew was needed. He was the ultimate advocate. Dan was not only a role model that I could look up to, but he was also one of my champions. I first met him on my 24th birthday, despite the fact that I struggled with doubts about my own future, in part the result of traumas that I had experienced throughout my life. Dan saw a capable and competent young man, and he provided me with the opportunities to learn and grow. I could go on for a long time about my relationship with Dan, but now doesn't feel like the right time or place. What I would like to share is that as I've reflected on the nearly 5 years I spent with Dan, the relationship he held with me reminds me of the relationships our work promotes broadly. He provided opportunities for me to engage and grow, was as non-judgmental as just about any human I've known, and provided honest and sometimes critical feedback. But we built the love and trust that has helped to transform my life. Not just to be sitting in this position that I am today, which he played a huge role in, but also in the healing journey that I continue on. As I still feel him with me in the work and other places as I go through the days, but I continue my own healing journey now without his physical presence, and we all do. Most folks, if not everyone on this call, knows Dan's contributions to the trauma-informed movement. For those who don't, There is more written in a blog post that Laura posted in the chat earlier, and a significant amount is memorialized in many videos and other resources on CTIPP's website and elsewhere. I will just recognize that he was a convener and visionary. All of CTIPP's programmatic areas, our community advocacy network CTIPP CAN, including these calls and what has been referred to as the National Trauma Campaign, building the movement to prevent trauma and foster resilience, and Press On, he played significant roles in creating. It is now our call to see them reach their full potential, as he wanted for all people, and we are focused to continue to honor his legacy by building upon the foundation he helped to lay. Dan was often frustrated by my tendency to be long-winded, so out of respect for him, I'll wrap up. I'll never be able to say everything that I would like to, but wanted to share some initial reflections. We want to find ways to hold space for the reflections of everyone in our network, as we know so many were touched by Dan's work. We will keep you updated on future opportunities, but one thing you can do if you'd like is to share your reflections or stories about Dan via the Google form that is in the blog post that Laura posted earlier, and Laura will also put the link to that form in the chat. This CTIPP CAN call was the last one that Dan coordinated, so I don't want to take up any more time with my own voice. If it's all right, though, I'd like to just hold a moment of silence and reflection for Dan before I turn it over to Jen for our policy and advocacy update, which Dan always loved. I invite you to focus on slow and full breaths or any other regulating activity that comforts you during this time. Thank you. So you all know, we will be launching a memorial fund to help fund Press On as Dan's vision. Moving forward, we'll keep you updated with that opportunity as we figure out the back end, because we've never done that before. But now I'll turn it over to Jen for our policy and advocacy update.
Thank you, Jesse Kohler.
Thank you, Jesse. That was a beautiful tribute, and such an honor to get to steward Dan's work and help continue his legacy in the work that we're doing to grow CTIPP, grow the movement, and enact Dan's vision. So we just so appreciate you all for joining these calls today and every month to help us move this work forward. And for those of you who are here for the first time, my name is Jen. I am CTIPP's Director of Government Affairs. And we will spend the next 30 minutes talking about policy and opportunities for advocacy as usual. As you may know, we are in full election season mode. The midterm elections are coming up on November 8th. Early voting has already started, so the House and the Senate is not working in DC, but the elected officials are running for their campaigns full-time in their districts. So in terms of DC policy updates, there's not much there. So I wanted to take the time to really focus in on a new piece of legislation that was introduced today that CTIPP has endorsed and supported the development of. And they are looking for, the sponsor of the bill, Representative Tonko, is looking for additional organizational or individual endorsements. So if you are interested in endorsing, please reach out to me. So we'll talk about that. And then I want to play a short video as part of CTIPP's advocacy series, which helps to train people about identifying ways to advocate and lean in. And then I will conclude with just a quick resource that we recently developed. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. But you're welcome to continue to post in the chat about celebrating Dan and anything else that you would like to. Don't have to switch gears too quickly if you're not ready to. One of the issues that we've spoke about briefly before is the trauma of natural disasters. And for those of you who are following in the news, we've recently had a number of really devastating natural disasters, some of which are ongoing. But September 18th, just a few weeks ago, we saw Hurricane Fiona make landfall in Puerto Rico. This was almost exactly on the anniversary of Hurricane Maria, which hit Puerto Rico several years ago. 10 days later, we had Hurricane Ian hit Florida. There's a death toll of over 100, and people are still, there's still search parties out there. And we've seen just devastating images of what's happened to the communities there. The mosquito fire is still active in California. This has been the worst fire of 2022. And there's an image on the right just showing, people had to be evacuated, 11,000 people evacuated, lots of damage. And then, of course, in Kentucky, just a few months ago in July, we had some floods on Eastern Kentucky, and hundreds of people are still missing. And of course, the natural disaster event itself is traumatic, but what happens afterwards really contributes to the toxic stress people experience. So when the access to food, access to your healthcare appointments are disrupted for months and months, that creates an experience of stress for so many people. There's the financial wreckage that's really hard to climb back out of for people who lose their homes and their belongings and their retirement savings along with them. They disrupt people's routines. People's neighborhoods become unrecognizable, which is really destabilizing. And then those rescue missions to try and identify missing people can go on for months and months and months. And so for those of you on this call who maybe have experienced natural disasters in your own communities, you may know firsthand how this creates so much stress. And our federal disaster relief efforts are so focused on a response, but there's not enough focus on prevention and readying communities to be able to be resilient when things like this happen. And so what we need through policy to build communities that are more resilient to the traumatic impacts is, one, we need to create these partnerships that build stronger communities and support well-being in a physical, psychological, social, emotional, cultural, and spiritual sense. These partnerships and communities will bring together many sectors to promote emotional regulation, mutual support. When we see the disruption of food access and water access, we need communities to be prepared in advance, to share supplies, to lean on each other, to help each other cope. And then secondarily, after the disaster, we need to make sure that community members are given the resources they need to do that sort of emotional support for one another. And so that leads me to the legislation that was just introduced today. So we've already spoken about the Rise from Trauma Act. This would bring cross-sector community coalitions together to strengthen communities and address all types of trauma, including ACEs, but also the trauma of disasters. So we've already worked a lot on that as a group. We've already spoken about the Post-Disaster Mental Health Response Act, and this is the legislation that would provide reimbursement funding to states, localities, and tribes after a disaster to train community members in how to support one another. Group sessions, posting coping skill flyers in the supermarket, having a emergency hotline for mental health crises, things like that. The legislation that was introduced today is called the Community Mental Wellness and Resilience Act. And this legislation was introduced by Congressman Paul Tonko and Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick in the House of Representatives. And this would create a new grant program that would build community partnerships and use a public health approach, which emphasizes prevention, that would help populations prepare for natural disasters and other types of adversity, and specifically including preparing for the disruption these natural disasters cause to traditional food and water systems. And whether you believe that these natural disasters may increase over the next decade, or whether you believe that, they may continue at the rate that they are, it's so important to make sure that, our communities are prepared and more, and the fabric is stronger, so that the ultimate side effects of unaddressed trauma are decreased. So as I mentioned, they are seeking endorsements, and I put my email on the screen. You can send me an email if you're interested in learning more, or endorsing the legislation. And then moving on, some of you may or may not know that we have an advocacy series on our website. And this is a series of about 20-minute videos that teach you how to be a very strong advocate. And so we wanted to share with you today one of these videos, which helps people identify who they want to target with their advocacy and hone in on their message. So we're just going to play the first 15 or so minutes of this, and you can find it on our website under the advocacy tab if you'd like to watch the full thing.
Hello and welcome to our advocacy module on identifying and preparing to engage with advocacy targets. This module will begin with some guidelines for defining advocacy targets or your audience, as well as tips for getting to know your audience, seeking common ground, and conveying evidence effectively. Again, there is no one-size-fits-all policy advocacy agenda. There are so many things that can influence your ability to be effective in this space, so I would just invite you to keep that in mind. In defining advocacy targets, you'll want to think deeply about who actually sets a policy to get a better idea of what avenues you have and what procedures you may need in your advocacy strategies. So, for example, say you noticed that the free health clinic that you work in has eligibility criteria that's set at 130% of the poverty level, but it's just too strict because many have fallen on economic hardship in response to the pandemic, since it's an area that has mostly service jobs and relies on tourism each year to support the job market. And more people are seeking supports to meet their basic needs, but on paper, they have too many assets to qualify for the help that they need. So you'd want to know, did the board of the agency set the policy, or is it the clinic, for example? Are they a part of a network of similar community clinics statewide that all receive funding through legislation that the governor signed into law? Or maybe there are federal funds that the agency receives, and the federal government is the one that determines eligibility criteria for recipients. Advocacy strategies for all of these different scenarios will look quite different. So first, you can ask yourself, who do you need to tell your message to? Who do you need to influence? If this issue is already on the ballot somehow, you may not need to even really think too much about this, but if you're starting totally from square one with your policy proposal, who do you need to go through to get an initiative on the ballot? And what do you think makes sense to do with each target, and how will that bring you closer to the goals you set? If it's legislation that will likely be heard in a committee, knowing what committee it will be heard in and what members are on that committee will be so helpful to you in the long run, because you can focus your advocacy efforts first on those who will have the greatest impact on your measure's success. In considering this, it's vital to think about what people, coalitions, organizations, groups, and legislative networks already are actively involved in related to achieving your goals. What can they do? Will they maybe lobby for you? Will they host events? Can you collaborate to establish and maintain relationships with the legislators in their districts? These are people who are already doing the work to some extent, and we'll talk about sharing resources, but just be thinking about potentially including outreach to or coordination with these groups in your plan. You may also find people or groups that are supportive of your policy solution or similar, but they might be unwilling for some of those reasons previously mentioned earlier in the series to put forth effort or resources to advance the solution without some additional convincing or pressuring. It helps to learn to anticipate and strategize around those people or groups who do not want you to make the change you're trying to make, especially those who will even put many different types of resources behind disrupting your efforts. Also notice, if you're able, the folks likely to not only oppose your policy proposal, but to actively then recruit others to oppose your policy proposal. And we'll talk about this too, but remember that you have the skills to help people see things in a different way. Knowing and anticipating oppositional arguments can help you strategize around changing hearts and minds. Looking at the neutral folks who you can identify, who might be likely to adopt your policy proposal or similar based on what you do know about them, but just haven't seemingly taken action yet, they're possible targets as well. What do they need to know, and who do they need to hear it from to be swayed? We'll talk more about this in a bit, but maybe they have a history of being convinced by expert voices over constituents, or perhaps they're people who defer to personal stories over empirical research. This context matters so much. And because you'll want to be thinking about all possible outcomes, so you can strategize around them to the best of your ability without being able to predict the future, certainly, considering barriers can be really helpful. You may anticipate future constraints, like budget constraints based on projections of spending, election cycle related challenges, or other circumstances that will impact your strategy. And certainly also thinking about others who could be influencers in general, as well as those who already oppose, and trying to employ your skill of finding common ground with members of various influential communities or organizations or groups. Once you've determined what venue you'll use to address your problem, you need to understand now how the venue operates. Legislatures function under rules adopted by the bodies, administrative agency procedures are governed by statutes, and local government procedures may be based on charter or ordinance. Regardless of the level in which you're operating, advancing a legislative policy instrument requires educating individual legislators and their staff. Engaging in these processes to analyze the issue and devise policy solutions will help advocates as change agents to determine both the level and the setting where action must be targeted to change this policy. This table offers some examples of those to whom you may advocate. We work within complex and interconnecting systems of policy, programs, and communities that directly and indirectly impact experiences, outcomes, and lives. Generally, advocacy work is applicable at different levels, so it's up to you to really think about what makes sense for the issue you're looking at. Regarding the three branches of government here, in a general sense, the executive branch of the government, regardless of level, from the White House and President to the governors of states and mayors in local communities, is responsible for implementing and enforcing the policies and actions passed by the legislative branch of government, whether that's Congress, the State General Assembly, or the City Council through their respective democratic processes that likely somewhat reflect the legislative process that we covered in a different module, though maybe slightly different depending on the venue. The judicial branch of government determines whether laws have been broken and whether those laws themselves are constitutional at the state or federal level. In judicial settings, laws and policies are both challenged and upheld, as well as punishments meted out for those who violate the policies and laws as passed by the legislative branch. I'd mention too that the policy progress at the state level tends to be faster but smaller than the federal level, just in general timeline-wise. Certain procedures over the years have also allowed states a bit more autonomy in policy design and implementation, which may come into play when choosing a target. And of course, there are some notable arenas outside of the governmental entities that we've talked about that can have enormous influence in the political landscape. And so I'd invite you to notice that policy advocacy targets may include individuals, agencies, organizations, grassroots groups, elected or appointed officials, public and private human service agencies, legislative bodies, companies or corporations, court systems, governmental entities, and more. In terms of the levels of policymaking, local government controls many aspects that we may take for granted. Access to local green spaces, sidewalks and roads that can be used by citizens, public safety considerations like how the police are run. Many aspects of school operations and more are all under local government purview. Developing relationships with these folks may very well matter to help improve the quality of life for all in your community. What's important, I think, to note about federal policies in particular is that they often do have a good deal of flexibility built in, so the states and localities have some discretion in the way a policy is applied to meet the needs of its residents. Social workers and other people who work in the health professions can influence policymaking in all of these domains. And knowing your audience at various stages of policy advocacy and development will help you devise effective strategies to influence whatever person or deliberative bodies are responsible for the issue at hand, at whatever level or levels make sense. Our response will be highly individualized based on a number of factors that we'll talk about. And I note that, of course, there also are ways to reach the general public through things like social media for any level of policymaking. And we'll address that. It just doesn't fit so well here in this matrix. We'll address it later in a different module. Evidence-based advocacy recognizes that approaches that are effective in one or some of these spaces may not be so efficacious in others. So let's talk a bit about knowing your audience. Based on what's been discussed so far, what are you thinking makes sense for you as an advocacy target? And once you've identified that, what do you think is important to know related to that audience that might shape how you present information to them? In addition to what you came up with, this slide contains general considerations for policymakers and advocates alike, with a question at the bottom summarizing an all-encompassing curiosity. What does your target audience really need to hear to be moved to act? Working closely with government officials on the development of policy can lead to better policy and more impactful outcomes, and the resources and levers that they have access to can be critical to the effective implementation of policy at scale. So as you are devising communication strategies and plans to engage others, you'll want to be sure that you're attuned to what might sway them by really getting to know who you're talking to. By becoming more familiar with legislators' backgrounds, advocates can deepen their personal relationships with people in power in order to further their policy agendas. Taking a look at their voting histories and also their professional and personal histories in terms of supporting causes similar or opposite to yours, and then trying to notice trends in what they prioritize and what they pay attention to can be key in identifying your target audience. Granted, I will concede that money, power, and votes are really at the top of most legislators' pyramids. And you can really think of that common interest that can feel a little disappointing as adaptive mechanisms of survival in politics. Having said that, there are many other things that they may pay attention to. It's important to approach every elected official, ally, stakeholder, constituent, potential partner, and others involved by starting where they're truly at, not where you want them to be. Policymakers may also have different ideas about what counts as good evidence, and you can find out a little more about this by paying attention to what they value and say and do. Learning takes place through the lens of deeply held beliefs, so understanding your target's values will yield different interpretations and ways to convey the way that you shape your conversations. You may also consider mobilizing the strategies on the lower half of this slide to inform and engage the public in important efforts to increase pressure on politicians to take action, from looking at the common ways people discuss the topics at hand to exploring other hot topics that you may be able to align with others around to get them on board for your solution. For instance, efforts to expand community-based positive parenting skill-building initiatives may not specifically mention that it could disrupt the intergenerational transmission of trauma in the text of a bill, but you can inject that perspective into the conversation while the time is ripe, which may alert more folks to the concepts and solutions that you're proposing. Which is actually a quite relevant segue into thinking about finding common ground and points of allyship, which is particularly valuable among those who've expressed opposition, as well as among those who seem like neutral parties, because you may have the opportunity to sway important people who can broaden your impact if you're willing to consider where compromise makes sense. The understanding is critical, and once opponents understand how and why the problem must be dealt with, their opposition may actually wane. And if they still have concerns, you may be able to assuage or accommodate them in a way that eliminates your target's opposition without compromising the attainment of your advocacy goal. Even if you can't accommodate or generate consensus with targets who wish to remain neutral or even are totally opposed, you'll have a clearer understanding of the basis of the opposition, and you can fashion a better rebuttal to arguments against your proposal and its implementation. You'll also want to provide all sides of the argument as transparently as possible when you communicate any of this information to everyone, but especially to folks who aren't already on board. Speaking to what might happen if we stayed at the status quo, how your policy solution helps, and revealing caveats of your solution, as well as alternatives, provides a solid foundation of information for targets to use to make important decisions. And when you're forthcoming in this way, you can generate trust and boost your credibility. Compromise is inevitable in policy advocacy because there are myriad competing demands, interests, values, and priorities. Wyoming Senator Mike Enzi once said that Congress can get more done by focusing on the 80% on which they can agree, and that it is counterproductive to be so rigid that no progress is made because of that existing 20% on which folks do not agree. There will always be a chance to improve upon what you have later, and so it's significant to note that with so many competing demands, it's unlikely we're going to see any policy solution or model legislation we construct adopted in toto or in their entirety. We can make evidence-informed, persuasive arguments that sway influential figures and entities that hold power to, at the very least, listen to and ideally respond positively to our arguments and gain support through paying attention to where the common ground lies. For this reason, it behooves advocates to approach every conversation with the intention to find commonalities. Having said that, there are bound to be some bright lines that you will not cross for various reasons when it comes to compromise, and that's okay. Being judicious and strategic in the way that you present this confrontation is key, as is supporting it with evidence that makes sense to the target, which brings us to knowledge is power.
Okay, so out of respect for time, we are going to stop. Stop there. But if you go to our website, ctipp.org/advocacy-series, or go to our website and under the campaign tab, you can select advocacy series. You can watch all of the videos, and Whitney, I think, has this really soothing way of speaking and walking us through it. And so I think that's really helpful. But just to contextualize these videos, I mean, we really enjoy bringing to you all very important and timely calls to action. And so we can advance our shared priorities by saying, call your member of Congress about this, and here are the talking points, or please sign on to this letter. So we really enjoy bringing to you those opportunities. But nothing should stop you from going and seeking out those opportunities yourself, developing your own calls to action, sharing your own priorities and requests with your representatives on the federal, state, local level. And I'm always here to support if you want consultation on, how you're developing it, what your messaging could be, different strategies. That's exactly what my office hours are for. So we wanted to provide those tools so that you can engage yourself. And then I'll conclude with just one final resource. Speaking of contacting your representative, we wanted to put together on one page an explainer of how to contact your federal representative. And so here's a blog post that we posted 2 days ago, and it breaks down all of the basics. How to find out who your federal representatives are. In the House, you'll have 2, in the Senate, you'll have 1. And then it explains how to write an email to your representative, how do you call your representative, how do you send physical mail to your representative, and then how do you request that your representative attend an event or meet with you. If you are holding an event related to trauma or the work that you're doing, and you want your representative to come out and visit the site or attend the event, or if you want to go into their office and meet with them, you can reach out through their website, and we explain exactly how. And then if you want to know what to say during your phone call, email, letter, or invitation, we link you back to the advocacy workshop series. So in addition to an explainer, we embedded throughout this blog post different tips and tricks, things like how long you can expect before you get a response, who's going to be picking up the phone, and what that conversation be like. If you get a voicemail, here are some tips to make sure that you get a response, and things like that. So next time we have a call to action that says, tell your member of Congress to pass this legislation, you can pull this blog post up very quickly and look at exactly how to do that. So I will put this link in the chat for you all to take a look. And with that, I will pass it back to Jesse with only 2 minutes over the amount of time I promised to take. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jen. As you all can see, our incredible staff, Jen, Director of Government Affairs, Whitney as our Director of Systems Transformation and Trauma-Informed Practices, and Laura, who you hear a lot from and is often not on screen, but doing so much work behind the scenes as our Director of Communications and Outreach, are creating wonderful tools and opportunities to continue to propel the trauma-informed movement, as are all of you. So please take advantage of these resources and opportunities. We create them so that way, as Jen said, we're pretty small and our capacity is limited, but we want to empower all of you to take action as well. So if you have questions, Jen's email is in the chat. You get plenty of emails from me, and you can sign up for any of our chat and choose as well. With that said, want to make sure that we give time for our planned presentation as well as the policy updates. And thank you again for allowing the time to celebrate and remember Dan and his contributions as well. So very quickly, we have 4 presenters today. Becky Haas is a global advocate and trainer on trauma-informed approaches, ACEs, and positive childhood experiences, so PACEs. Becky is a pioneer in creating trauma-informed communities and is the author of several sector-specific professional development trainings. We have 2 presenters, or maybe just one, from a company called eTransX, but Mohan utilizes his information, systems, and engineering expertise to help communities achieve better outcomes while improving efficiency and efficacy. And Richard Taylor is the vice president of eTransX and strategizes and advocates for improved well-being at the local and community levels, including initiatives to reduce poverty, substance use disorders, improve health outcomes, and promote positive child and youth development. And we also have Bill Barberg, who is the president and founder of Insight Information Incorporated. Bill has provided training and consultations on innovative collective impact and system change efforts in the United States and Canada for the past 15 years. He leads the development of the ACEs and Resilience Resource Commons for Communities, a free wiki-based repository of information to accelerate and support community coalition work to minimize and address ACEs. So I will turn it over to Becky Haas, but before I do so, just want to remind folks that as you have questions during these presentations, please feel free to put them in the chat. I always keep a queue, so that way with the time that we have at the end, if we do have time, we can ask some of the questions to the presenters. That can also include any questions for Jen on their wonderful presentation earlier as well. So Becky, with that, thank you all for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jesse. And I think, Richard, are you going to put up some slides?
Yes, Jesse, can you give me permission to share my screen?
I just did, if you try it now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And yes, it's hard to press on in this call, and just so appreciate Jesse's wonderful tribute, and to Dan, who impacted so many of us. And it's an honor to be having a small part in today's call. I've learned so much from them since I started joining them in 2017. What I'm going to share just briefly, and then Richard Taylor, Mohan will take it from there. So in 2014, when I was working for the Johnson City Police Department with an $800,000 JAG grant to reduce drug-related violent crime and recidivism, I came across a 2014 SAMHSA concept paper on using a trauma-informed approach. And as Dan shared in his aha moment about ACEs, I had a very similar one. And the concept paper said that to address trauma in a community requires a multi-pronged, multi-agency, cross-sector approach. And it's 21 pages, but that captured my attention. And so the work that I started in Northeast Tennessee that went on to be recognized in 2018 by SAMHSA as a model for other cities to follow, the picture of a toolkit that Dr. Andy Clemens and I wrote together, that's been recommended by a Johns Hopkins publication as a practical tool. That's what we started to do, is to address trauma in rural Appalachia through a cross-sector approach of training. So next slide, Richard. And some of the things that I've written in PACES Connection, how I started to write trainings. We trained over 4,000 professionals in 3 years before the SAMHSA recognition. And then I was recruited to the largest health system here, 22 hospitals in 3 states, as their first trauma-informed administrator to continue this work on a much larger scale. But I had written trainings for workforce and schools and policing, trauma-informed policing, been post-certified in Tennessee 4 years now. And now as a national consultant, I am helping communities to build these cross sectors. So about 18 months ago, Richard and Mohan, our paths crossed, and I really saw how beautifully the work that they were doing aligned with a focus that I had. And so we've kind of joined up in some areas, and many of the groups that I'm working with, I've brought Richard and Mohan on to share about tools and resources that they have available and that they'll tell about now.
Yes, thanks, Becky. We have been in business for 20 years, helping communities address health, and then poverty, and then substance use. And then we found that a lot of the foundational issues for those problems were people that had trauma and adverse childhood experiences. And so that's when we reached out to Becky and said, how can we use our software to help support communities that are wanting to address this challenge of trauma? And so with Becky's assistance, she also recommended you need to be part of CTIPP and you need to be part of PACES Connection. And so we've learned a lot about how do we use technology to help communities. And I'm talking about cross-sector organizations. I'm talking about, all aspects, school systems, as well as the healthcare world, as well as law enforcement. How can we work together to support this in a community-based fashion? And of course, that includes addressing both the pair of ACEs that account for a lot of the challenges. And then we found a lot of things for offsetting ACEs are addressing positive factors. And so how can we support prevention of ACEs by working with community organizations that provide examples of these skills here about ways that we can work with early childhood as well as youth, as well as other programs, mentoring and after school programs. And so that's sort of the universe that we are looking to connect and share information with the system. And that includes this ability to build up buffers at the family level and at the community level. So our system is designed to address both household, personal, family challenges, as well as how do we work with the various community-based organizations that are serving these families and individuals. And this is an example of some of those groups, civic involvement, as well as faith-based and other support groups. And so the Wellbeing Care Community System is really three systems and three functions in one system. We're a community care coordination system focusing on building success pathways for those families and individuals. We're a community referral system connecting the community-based organizations that are helping those individuals with these challenges. And then we're a community information exchange system, but being able to share data between different systems. And so we bring all this functionality under one system, and then our users are the navigators, the mentors, coordinators that are working with families and dealing with these adverse childhood experiences, are helping to find ways to add protective factors. And then we have the personal support network, and then we have the clients themselves, individuals and families, and then we have the staff of the community-based organizations that are also working with these individuals and families, both from a prevention standpoint, as well as how do we help people into programs that are available to help them in dealing with these trauma issues. And so this is the workflow. We identify people and individuals and families that have challenges, and either, again, from a prevention standpoint or having to help people that have had a history of trauma, and then conduct assessments to better understand that person's situation, and then assign a mentor, a navigator, a coach, a professional that will be working with them to build a success pathway. This is your pathway to dealing with the trauma or prevention of trauma. And then how do we manage community service referrals with the system? And then how do we track progress and outcomes? And think of it as a systemic, comprehensive way to engage not only at the family level, but also at the community level, working together to promote trauma-informed educational materials, as well as dealing with connecting the organizations that provide protective services. And so this is what it looks like deployed. We usually find an anchor organization that's the sponsor of the system. Usually this is a nonprofit organization in the community. And then they bring the system in, and then they help open it up for referrals that are coming from multiple sources, saying, hey, this is a household or family or individual that needs help in both either prevention or treatment. And then the service providers at the bottom are the organizations that are also connected. We're connecting with the client and the family at the personal level with cell phone, phone apps. And then how do we find funding sources to help fund this operation over time? And this is where we're working with Becky in terms of a specific community in Tennessee, Cumberland County. They have started an initiative where they have formed a coalition, a 501c3, to address trauma and ACEs and help promote positive child and youth development. And so this is where we're getting our start in terms of actually working with the community with this system. And that's where we are today. We're looking to how can we help other communities as well. And that's my contact information. And I think we have a minute for questions, and then Bill Barberg will be presenting. So Jesse, just however you want to proceed next here.
Thanks, Richard. So we will have Bill present, and then we'll sort of coordinate questions around the cross-sector community solutions and strategies that we're presenting on here together for both at the same time. I see your colleague Mohan just joined, so before we turn it over to Bill, Mohan, just want to welcome you. See if you want to say hello very quickly, and then we'll turn it over to Bill. You're on mute.
You're muted.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, which I totally did acknowledge.
We always do this, isn't it? Hello, everyone. My name is Mohan. I am the founder and CEO of eTransact. My colleagues should be joining very soon. Becky and Richard.
Becky
we're
and
already
Richard
here.
just
We're already here,
presented.
Mo.
Yeah.
Okay,
We
good,
just
good.
wanted for you to get to say hello.
Hello to everyone. Thank you, guys. Looking forward to talking to you guys.
Thank you.
Go for it.
All right.
And Bill, please.
All right. So my name is Bill Barberg, and I am the president and founder of Insight Formation. We're a Twin Cities-based company that serves U.S. and North America, and we've developed a platform that really complements what you just saw. What Richard was sharing with the Wellbeing Care Community platform works a lot with individuals and their referrals and their success pathways and a lot of that type of information. Where Insight Formation works and where the Insight Vision platform works is at managing the larger scale strategy for collective impact or system change. And we work with a lot of different types of coalitions, but they're all large scale coalitions that are dealing with very complex issues such as those listed here, and where there's not a simple solution and there's a lot of details. And we bring a variety of things. You'll be seeing just a few screenshots of our Insight Vision strategy management and strategy engagement platform. But along with that, we bring, or even without the software, we bring a lot of training on topics related to implementing strategies across cross-sector coalitions. And I wrote a chapter on implementing population health strategies for the book here, Solving Population Health Problems Through Collaboration. And more recently, co-authored with Michael Quinn Patton and others, a peer-reviewed article on leading social transformation that was published in the Journal of Change Management. And as was mentioned in the introduction, we have also worked on developing a lot of tools, many of which are free, to help coalitions working with positive and adverse childhood experiences and resilience to be able to more quickly develop and implement strategies that are well organized and designed to get results and to get implemented. So if you think of some of the big challenges when you're trying to scale up and move forward with dealing with these challenges of trauma and adversity, just how do you design the strategy? I mean, by the time if you create a document, it could just be a huge document and then nobody's going to read that. But they're very complex problems, and simple solutions aren't going to get the job done. And even if you could lay out a lot of details of the strategy, how do you organize those pieces and not be overwhelmed? And this is where the technique of using a strategy map to really create the structure is really rising up as a well-recognized, very strong practice. And then making that strategy map zoomable. It's similar to how you can zoom in on Google Maps to different levels of detail if you want to look at a whole state or just a neighborhood. Similarly, with the right technology, you can zoom in on different parts of the strategy. And so when it comes to managing the details of implementation, where you might have hundreds of partners working on different parts of things over multiple years with people coming and going, it really helps to have the tools as well as the tools for measuring, monitoring, and evaluating progress on those details. And that's what Insight Vision was designed to support. So I'm just going to show 3 quick examples of the capabilities and some of the functionality that it has. It's got very rich support for strategy maps. And strategy maps are designed in the way we use them to be bigger than just a logic model for an individual grant or program, but they can lay out a long-term framework of what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve and the various strategies to get there. And you can use this to align many different organizations' works, many different funding sources, policy work, and other things that are going to help you achieve these larger scale changes. And it really helps reinforce system thinking and creative problem solving. And with the Insight Vision platform, when you click on any of the objectives, these rounded rectangles, you get an additional pop-up that's got a rich array of information with a customized set of tabs for things like what are the current efforts, or what's what we call the from to gap, describing the current state and the desired state and the measure. And if you scroll down, you can see what like partner programs or partner objectives are supporting this as you build out your collective impact. A second key thing is the measurement system. And many places that have been working on collective impact efforts for a long period of time really have kind of a mess when it comes to their data. They manage to get out a report here and there and get information back to their funders, but the details of the different measures and the background and how they're defined and who's updating them and where does the data come from and comments, that's usually very scattered. So each time you have to do a report, it's a nightmare. But with a software platform designed to support this, you can manage that information, drill down to different levels of detail, see your trends, your aggregations, supporting reports, and it's integrated with the strategy, with that strategy map. And it's also integrated with the action plan. And the nice thing about this, it's not like having a bunch of different spreadsheets or PowerPoints. When you update data once, it can update in many different places where that information is used, and even on different websites that can embed content from this system. So here we just see a screenshot of a scorecard where you have objectives like increase universal childhood developmental screening. You have then a measure with many different columns you can pick. And then when you click on that, you automatically get the trend chart, the target. You can add other benchmarks, tables, and if you scroll down, there's more information on the measure, comments, and such. The third thing is having this dynamic action management system where you can develop specific actions that you can then delegate out to various partners. You can then monitor the progress with status updates and comments and percent complete, and have supporting documents or links to other information. And this is good because actions should be updated on a regular basis. While the strategy should remain fairly stable, lots of different actions with different partners contributing to advance that. So it's really designed to support that whole journey. And this is one of the many views where you can see actions. And as you would expect, when you click on any one of them, you get more detail. And you get descriptions and status updates and attached documents and the ability to easily, just with one click, edit the status of what percent complete you are or add other notes. So because we were cutting down this presentation, I took out the demos. I had 3 demos over a total of 11 minutes showing different clients using these capabilities. And I'm going to put that link in the chat, but we also have it on the page for insightformation.com/insightvision that is specifically looking at ACEs and early childhood coalitions using these different capabilities and how they're integrated together. The nice thing about a platform like this is that it can support many different things like housing strategies, health improvement, chronic disease prevention strategies, mental health, suicide prevention. It can be an infrastructure that supports collective impact across multiple topics with a lot of flexibility for how it's administered. So just kind of wrapping up, you have the strategy mapping, the scorecard, the detailed information management, along with really excellent practices for large-scale strategy implementation. And so I have our links to some more information and my contact information in this slide here. So stop sharing so we can open it up for questions now, right?
Thanks, Bill. So I have a general question for both presentations, and Mohan and Becky, please feel free to hop in on this first question. But outside of a specific software platform for either, Richard, can you talk about the need for cross-sector collaboration why that's so important. And Becky and Mohan, this goes for you as well. And also some of the struggles that communities that are getting involved, again, outside of a specific software platform, when they are beginning to work across sectors, and some strategies that you've found that are effective in bridging those gaps.
Typically, when we come into community, you have silos of operations that don't always work together or have not had a history of that. And that's why we try to find an anchor organization to start with that has that trust relationship to help them coordinate with us on bringing together the cross-sector organizations that need to communicate. And so that's where we start. And then we provide a focus in terms of what area you want to start with. You want to start with prevention or education, and then we work from there. And so it allows us to identify what information needs to be shared, who needs to see it. And then our platform is fully HIPAA and privacy compliant as well, so that we can do personal information that can be shared, but managing that referral process. And this is what we've learned from other communities, is that referral process is so critical. You identify somebody that has a high ACE score and they need help, or how can we help offset that, or how can we help prevent ACE scores? And that's where we bring the cross-sector organizations together first. And Becky's got a lot of experience. I'll let Becky talk about, how she's helped bring communities together. We're just a tool. We're a software tool to facilitate data sharing so that the left hand knows what the right hand is doing, and that people are educated as what is available in our community to help people that have trauma and ACEs.
Just to add before Becky goes, I do want to just connect what we do to what Becky does. As Richard pointed out, we'll go for an anchor organization. That is a scenario, a use case scenario where communities have already gotten together, they're thinking, they know, they work together. And there will be where communities have absolutely not much there. And that is when really building the community together, stakeholders together, which is what Becky does fantastic, bringing all the parties together, talking to them. That's part of the collective impact process. So there are multiple ways we reach where our software solution is, once you guys identify a problem, once you identify an anchor organization that takes the responsibility to bring the stakeholders, and they have, not all of them are going to be on the same page, but at least get them to listen and open to it. Once you get that, these are all the problems that we always see. And it is still, I never want to say it's a piece of cake. It is still a struggle to get them to work together. And I'm sure you guys know that. And, having worked in other places there. So that is where on the first, when you already done it, that's much easier. And our solution basically makes that process of collective impact better, just like what Bill was talking about, using the tools, ability to share. But we are more in the operational side, really helping one-on-one. It's not on the strategy side. Once you figure out a strategy, once you just figure out an action, how do you document, how do you execute it? So we are all about execution. And what tools you need to execute. And that's where we are. And Becky comes into where when nothing is there, she brings it all together. Go ahead, Becky.
Well, I was just going to say, in my work, what started at the police department, I was reducing the drug-related and violent crime and recidivism. I had to do it through a partnership approach. So we had 19 programs, 35 agencies did, that went as high as being recognized by the U.S. Department of Justice as a success story. And in 2014, our work was awarded through President Obama, the National Criminal Justice Association. It was really surreal what amazing things our community did. But in that, we had housing authority, community gardens, behavioral health, mental, physical health, corrections, judges, you name it. And so as I learned about ACEs and then seeing the concept paper from SAMHSA, it really just all came together. And so in a lot of my presentations on why we need to create trauma-informed multidisciplinary teams as best practice is something that all the experts on today's call know, is that no family or an individual that we help in our community is generally served by one agency. And that really have to break out of the silos and share this information and in my community, a pediatrician who's a dear friend. I trained her in 2016 as a part of her work. She wrote a Tennessee Building Strong Brain grant, and in her pediatric practice, she began screening for ACEs, and then that she produced literature that a family would receive. And then if the ACE score of a family was, I believe, 4 or more, then she referred them to a social work. But her program, it had technology fail in the fact that they could not communicate to the different partnerships. And then the last thing I want to say, which I've shared to Mohan and Richard before, is wonderful Nadine Burke-Harris. She talks about in her TED Talk that when she's a pediatrician in San Francisco, if she likened ACEs to lead poisoning, that we could, just go to the house and find the source of the lead. And I think where we're at now in creating resilient communities is really helping people to navigate the resources that are already there, like housing, like filling out a Boys and Girls Club application to get kids enrolled in a safe place after school. And so when I met the gentleman here from eTransit, I really felt like it was a solution that would be really helpful in building resilient communities.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just chime in. When it comes to breaking down silos and working together, an example was when in 2016, my team was brought in to Arkansas to work on transforming a foster care system that was under great stress. But you go in and you have left-leaning liberal Democrats, you have right-leaning Republicans, some that are people who are very faith-based, others that were probably atheists. We had law enforcement and people who weren't so fond of law enforcement, and different nonprofits that were used to competing for money and not working together. But by going through the process of the strategy map process of looking at a future desired state where fewer kids needed to go into the foster care system and things like that, we were able to find some common desired future states, because people generally tend to want similar things when it comes to safe neighborhoods and kids to thrive. And then by working backwards of what were the things that were going to allow us to that state or the communities that we would work in to get there, these people from very different groups started to build a consensus of things and see where their roles could play in. So it really shifted the conversation from a lot of the combative or competitive type things to kind of collaborative problem solving and putting the best thinking together. And thousands of kids have been able to stay with their parents successfully. Hundreds of kids have been reunited who otherwise would have stayed in the foster care until they aged out. And so they really demonstrated the value of thinking through a strategy rather than everyone coming in and fighting for their program or their political belief.
And Bill, the ARC Wiki is a tool that anybody can access and contribute to, right?
Yes, it is. It is a wiki-based platform. I'll put the link in the chat along with that link to the video. And it includes the strategy map template. It has a lot of detail underneath as we continue to build out more detail on many different topics, including measures and action plans. And we try to find good free resources that people can then quickly use. So I'll put that link in the chat here now as well.
Bill, you don't vet the plans that communities put up, do you? So if we had, say, PACES Connection, we've got 459 cross-sector communities, and if we did a call to, to share out strategic plans, would you vet those, or would you just let people post them? I love what you're doing, and I I can see so many ways it clicks, connects. Yeah.
I'm not quite sure when you say in the ARC where we've been building, I've sort of been moderating that over 4 or 5 years now of trying to keep building out different pieces. So we're not just taking one organization's strategy and putting it in that wiki. I mean, if they want to get our software and put whatever strategy they want in that, they can. But in the shared wiki, we're really, I guess I'm sort of helping to try to build the best ideas into more of a shared best practice rather than, and a lot of people are submitting different things as we work with them, and it just keeps getting better. And that's, I just put that in the chat to everyone. That's the ARC wiki. And that has some videos that gives you tours of that as well.
Thanks, Bill. And thanks, Carrie, for the question. Jen, if you're there, hey, I got a question in the chat about going back to your presentation earlier, how the election impacts, our advocacy goals broadly through this movement.
That's a great question. And it's, I think in the next couple of months on our calls, we'll start talking about how we're preparing for the next Congress. So each congressional session is 2 years. Starting in January, we will begin a new Congress. Every piece of legislation has to be reintroduced all over again, but it provides us another opportunity to organize. And I can actually share now that, I can actually share really quickly my screen because I was just thinking about this. This is from a separate presentation, but, we're gearing up for next Congress and we have a bunch of pretty ambitious goals that we need a lot of help from our advocates to accomplish. We really want to grow our base of advocates to reach every congressional district. We want to continue our education in Congress and federal agencies, keep our issues in the public conversation. But we also, have some policy goals. We want to pass some bills into law. And so you see, for example, this example was in Pittsburgh, where they're going to have a new member in the House of Representatives because their current member is retiring, and they're going to have a new senator. And so CTIPP doesn't currently have relationships with either of these future elected officials. And so the election impacts our advocacy efforts because we're going to need our advocates to be helping us introduce CTIPP to these new legislators, introducing the issues we care about, persuading them to care and take an interest on ACEs, social determinants of health, trauma-informed policy and practices. And so our advocacy in the new Congress after the election will be very focused on, really mobilizing around that introduction and reintroduction of legislation and reintroduction of CTIPP to the elected. So the election really matters. And I think, as you are all hopefully, or it's none of my business whether or not you vote, but as you look through the candidates that are running in your district and your state, you can look through what are some of their priorities around child welfare, around healthcare, around substance use and opiates, and whether they mention trauma, whether they mention social determinants of health, because the more friendly and sympathetic elected officials that we can bring into Congress, the more co-sponsors we can get on our bills and the more likely they are to pass. And so I think that's sort of how I would frame the significance of the elections and then the work ahead over the next few months after the elections. But we will have more content for everyone about gearing up for the 118th Congress very soon.
Thanks, Jen. That's just another good plug. I'll put the advocacy series in the chat one more time. But please feel free to go and watch all 9 to support that, but appreciate that answer. Katie had a question in the chat, a good reminder, that there are multiple platforms that can be helpful. And Katie put in the chat one called Unite Us.
Yes, yeah. Katie, if I can share some of our thoughts. Unite Us is what we call as a referral management system, where some organization, an anchor organization, can send a referral for a service to any one of the CBOs in the community. So that's what they do. What we do, the well-being care community, is it does that, but beyond that, it also does community care coordination and community exchange, information exchange. In order for a collective impact process to be effective, such as what you guys are trying to do, You got to have, obviously, the ability to coordinate the care, ability to make referrals to services, and the ability to exchange information real time to different systems that are used by the community partners. If we can't do all three of them, you're not going to have a complete picture or a successful thing there. You can definitely do one aspect of it if that's all the focus. So what we normally do, Katie, and it happens, different communities deployed based on their influence and what they can do. We know in East Tennessee health system, they usually go after health system. Health system pretty much gives it free to these people there. So they do that. So in a community where they already are there, but they don't have the community care coordination community, that is what we bring to the table. And when we need to engage, integrate with the Uniters, we integrate with them so that we still complete the process. So what they do is just 1/3 of what we do. The 2/3 they don't address, which is really critical about it, using the success pathway for the kids. How do you do that? So all they do is a transaction-based, a service-based at that time, not a life management approach that we take, where they take a service management. I need a service, I need a transportation, I get it done. That's all their focus. Whereas here, here is all the issues. You need the trauma, you got to get through some trip, maybe get you the Boys and Girls Club, and other training, other education. All that we do. So that's the fundamental difference, Katie. Does it make sense at all?
Yeah. Thank you, Mohan. And Katie confirmed that answered the question. And so appreciate that. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. So want to thank our presenters. I'll speak slowly in case any last ones come through. But if not, want to invite a quick brain break as we head into the rest of our days. For those of you who have been on multiple calls, you'll know that my favorite one is scissor winks, which is, Carrie was ahead of me. So we go opposite a hand and opposite eye, and then we switch. It looks silly. Sometimes the mouth gets involved, as you can see. Easy way to re-regulate ourselves throughout the day. One thing that I want to correct for myself earlier is it's kind of like patting your tummy and rubbing your head, and I was never good at that either. One thing that I just want to correct very quickly is that, or not correct, but add to, is that earlier I stated and shared how incredible the work of our staff, Jen, Whitney, Laura, has been. I also just want to give credit to our wonderful board of directors who do an incredible amount of work as volunteers, as well as our partners, including all of you on this call. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without you, and just wanted to give proper credit where it is due, always. And so just wanted to share that again. Richard, Mohan, Bill, and Becky, thank you for sharing. Jen, thank you for the wonderful updates as well. Get involved, regardless of, what community you're in. We got to get our voices out there, ask questions that relate to trauma-informed care, prevention-oriented nature, and promoting resiliency as we continue to build the movement to prevent trauma and foster resilience. We look forward to seeing you next month. We are going to try out a new platform other than Zoom called AirMeet, which is very good for connectivity. And so it's going to be a little bit more, less presentation focused, more trying out the breakout rooms. We've been doing some work internally, but want to make sure that we try it out with the network and get your feedback. And so for those of you who are able to join, it's always the third Wednesday of the month from 2 to 3:30 Eastern time. And next month, that is going to be November 16th. And so we hope to see you then. We'll send out a blog post explaining AirMeet, and really look forward to your feedback as we try to implement that platform. There's a lot of really good, powerful networking tools that could be there to support the movement, but we need to get your feedback to make sure that it's as useful as we hope it is. So thank you all. Be safe and well, and we look forward to seeing you very, very soon.
Thank you so much, Jesse and the team, for giving us this opportunity to present.
Thank you.